Greetings and welcome to AmericaTV.me, powered by you. Today, we are going to talk about a very important development as the Minnesota legislature approaches its final days and hours. There's a budget deal on, and we are concerned about the failure for long-term investment in the ALANA African, Latino, Asian, Native American communities. And so to give us some perspective, I first have Annastacia Belladonoa-Carrera. She is the executive director of Common Cause Minnesota. Anastasia, could you give us a brief overview of what's going on? What's the final deal looking like in terms of money?
Yeah, so there's a lot of activity happening this week on our Capitol campus. I'm sure many people have heard, perhaps through their social media or even during the regular news castings here on television or radio. But on Monday, the governor, as well as the House Speaker, Melissa Hortman, and the Senate Majority Leader, Senator Miller, they came upon an agreement. And that agreement is super important because what it does is that it sets the parameters for how much it is that each of these major areas are going to have in spending. So like higher education, what's going to be, the budget there, the supplemental budget there. Same thing for public safety, state government and elections, even like our investments in our natural spaces, right? Environmental stuff. So it's really important. This week is like crunch time. Much like we have our own budgets in our households, the state government is the same thing, right? They have so much money in revenue, so much expenses that they're going to have, and so much that they want to put away in savings. And I just want to make sure that we kind of see it that way as we're going to be going through these numbers. And the numbers can sometimes become super overwhelming, but it's really just important to know that just like our households, right? We don't want to spend more money than with revenues, than the money that we're bringing into our own households, right? And it's the same thing with states. So let's talk about what some of those targets were this week. So this week, these three individuals brokered an agreement that essentially divides $9 billion, historic amount of money, into the various projects and programs and what have you through the surplus, and also saves a little bit of money, right? So it sounds familiar, right? That's the same way we do our own household budgets. Let's talk about those. The broad agreement in spending the $9 billion of surplus goes around more or less in the following way. They've agreed to include $4 billion for new spending, right? And another $4 billion is going to be spent through taxes and tax breaks, right? It leaves a bottom line of about $4.1 billion that should go to making sure that our own economy is protected, in the sense that if something goes wrong, Minnesota will still have $4.1 billion in its coffers and its savings to be able to make up for those unexpected turns in our economy, right? Whether it's inflation or any kind of other impact on our broader economy. And so much like our own households, right? We have our expenses, we have our savings, and we have those revenues that come in. Now, what does that mean for us specifically? There was an agreement that earmarked $1 billion of the 9 for E through 12 education, okay? And another $1 billion for health and human services. There was another chunk of money, $450 million, that was reserved for public safety. And that's certainly an area that many, many people care deeply about, regardless of what side of the police reforming issues that you land on. There's another $1.4 billion that was earmarked for bonding. And that bonding is really just, essentially just think about the roads, fixing state buildings, creating, reinforcing our bridges and that infrastructure and things like that. So there is, interestingly enough, this is a new development. Interestingly enough, I just found out today that there's $1.32 billion that was left for other areas that the leaders agreed to. So think of like pet projects, right? So they put aside 1.32 billion. That's a lot of money that they're going to allocate to like their own pet projects as they agree to between now and the end of the legislative session this Sunday at midnight is
So
formally signing
just
off.
to come and pick up from there. So out of 9 billion, 2 billion was spent already on unemployment insurance, and
Mm-hmm,
500 million went to frontline workers. And
mm-hmm,
a lot of the frontline workers are ALANA, who got workers who were hit hard during the pandemic, and so but they have to apply to get it. So
mm-hmm,
of the rest of the money, they have put 4 billion aside, and then what you talked about. So now in these committees, when you look at that spreadsheet, there's practically not a whole lot of money in these key committees. Like when you look at jobs, it's only
mm-hmm,
about 11 million
mm-hmm,
for everybody,
mm-hmm,
and um, uh, for 20 million for higher ed, and down the line. So I want to get some perspectives on this, because right from the House Select Committee on Racial Justice, that made the case that the state should invest at least $1 billion in wealth building infrastructure of the ALANA communities, ALANA BIPOC communities. But now we are seeing numbers like 11 million and 20 million for everyone. So I want to get a little perspective on that. I want to bring in John Yang, who is the president of the Hmong Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for joining us, John.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Dr. Bruce. But yeah, just going over the numbers, 11 million is really low to invest in the jobs committee. And, our businesses and organization, we serve the community, right? So it's very important that we continue to help support the businesses and organizations that serve the community. So, um, we need to learn why the BIPOC or Atlanta community is such have such high employment rate. Why does the number of owners for minority businesses compared to the rest in Minnesota? It's only about 9%. I was looking at the most recent census, and the population for the minority BIPOC, we make up about 20% of the population in Minnesota. So there's a kind of like disparity between the businesses and our community, right? I mean, we would like to see the number of businesses be almost around the number of population, around 20%. So right now we're at about 9% for the state of Minnesota. So it's important for us to really focus and have the state focus on helping our businesses and organizations so that we can help better serve the community. So, and just to figure, we have to know why there's such a high unemployment rate, why there are poverty. So we need these programs and services and businesses to serve our community. So that's why it's so important to really emphasize that, because you can give someone money, but when the money's gone, if you don't have programs to support them and for them to navigate and learn and change the changing environment in terms of digital marketing, for example, if you don't adapt to the changing environment, you're still going to be where you're at when you first started after the money's gone. So it's important for us to have these services and programs to help navigate the businesses so they can continue to grow through economic development and growth.
So in context, what the ALANA BIPOC businesses, they produce about $7 billion worth of goods and services in Minnesota. They employ about 60,000 workers, making them as a collective one of the largest employers. They also pay about 1.5 billion in annual payroll. So they are a powerful engine of economic growth, and we've been asking for $1 billion investment in workforce and business development to build up the capacity of the businesses to grow, because they tend to be smaller and also have been hit hard during COVID. So in the area of workforce too, we find that the uh, ALANA workers, they are playing a critical role with the aging of the Minnesota population. There's huge segments of the population over 55 years old, and who's going to play that role of the next generation of workforce, but yet we don't see long-term investments in the workforce in Minnesota. So I want to bring in Brett Buckner into the conversation. Brett, he's the managing director of 1mn.org. Brett, what's your perspective on the latest budget negotiations?
Well, and thanks again for Dr. Corrie for having us on this important conversation. Um, Unfortunately, we don't invest in the future. We normally will do things such as think about how the world is sustaining itself right now, and to think about those who already have, as opposed to how do we invest for the future with people who need to have. And so I think what John has said before, it is pretty important. Where that money runs out, you literally stall the potential of an economy. So our hopes, and again, this is where representation comes in very, very importantly, that when you don't have enough voices over there to push the power conversation, to see beyond what we are used to doing, that's when we lose out. The reality is that the future of Minnesota is not with certain populations, it's with communities of color, Black, brown, etc. And we have to do a much better job of having that conversation about where we need to be and where we're going, as opposed to maintaining the days of Wendell Anderson, when we said that Minnesota was the exceptional, the good life was taking place here. So we have to rearrange and we have to retool.
We were having this conversation a little earlier, and a storm came by and knocked everybody's power and with hail. And Dr. John Peterson was with us, and he had a perspective on higher ed, because in the higher ed bill, there's only 20 million. Yet our ALANA students contribute $1 billion every year in tuition, but we're not reinvesting back in them in four critical areas in affordable education, like the state grant program, or tuition, free college, and in the supportive environment, support services, and a culturally intelligent learning environment, and career paths to good majors that give them jobs. No investment. What would 20 million do in this situation of a growing economy, a shortage in the Minnesota labor force? So this focus on the immediate and not the long term is concerning. And so we've asked. There's a petition floating, moving around the community that has got a lot of support. And this petition basically asks for the state to take, as John said, we are 20% of the population of Minnesota, put 20% of the surplus into a trust fund, $2 billion, that will be long-term investment in business, workforce, and youth. What do you have any comments about that concept?
I think it's a smart and prudent investment. I know, Dr. Corrie, you have made it very clear on several of the studies, several of the reports, that an investment, the multiplier effect, a dollar within our communities yields X. I forget the numbers right off the top of my head, but the reality is that if we're investing into our future, if we're thinking about how, and it's not just the economic growth, it's the issue of public safety, it's the public health, it's the actual development of society and community from there. So it has, when you start taking in all the issues of the economy, it has so much more potential than trying to maintain what we're doing. So I don't know why this is even being debated, in St. Paul at times. But we do know that as we have our calls for action and for investment, there are other parts of the society. Greater Minnesota continues to say, that if you invest, the state's going to grow, at a certain rate. That in exurbs and suburbs, that they don't have enough money. And again, it goes right back to the whole thing of when is enough enough? I don't think we really understand what $1 billion is in the grand scheme of things and how we can really invest it. A lot of people kind of get flummoxed when we get to 100 million. So
Yeah.
multiply
Yeah.
from there. The reality is that we're not. I don't think we're being smart with the investments and trying to set our society up for long-term investment and opportunity in order to placate during the political year, during the election year, our usual voters. So I think that's also what's stalling the conversation as well.
So as we wrap up, here is the petition that is going to that has been signed by a number of community leaders for the governor and legislative leaders to intake of the $4 billion that is put away, take $2 billion, put it in a trust fund for long-term wealth building of the ALANA communities. So, any last minute, last words that you might have? Um, uh, to wrap up this conversation, let's start with. I know everybody is monitoring the sessions that are going on right now. So, Anastasia, you're doing a great job keeping us updated. So you can have the last word, and if you need to leave,
I really encourage. Thank you, Dr. Corrie. First of all, for creating these spaces and opportunities for those of us that are, at the forefront of some of these spaces to get back to community, because that's so important. I will invite anyone watching this to please, no matter when you see this video or this live stream, please reach out to your elected officials and have that conversation, right? Have the conversation around, what did you do that I can look at that shows me you supported investment in our communities? And don't, make that ask regardless of what party it is, regardless of how much you may like the candidate. Make that question known. Have them lay that out for you. And more importantly, send you the information that you can look at that informs you of what those efforts look like. Because this is movement building, right? This isn't just a one shot and you're done. This is literally laying an infrastructure for movement building that gets us in that direction.
And thank you very much, Anastasia, for all your selfless work, putting all kinds of hours to keep us community empowered for the vote as well as policy. John, any last thoughts?
Yes, so the petition is good, but I'd like to see ALANA coalition created so all our organization business can come together. And when we go lobby, we could just go directly to the governor, right? And we can represent the whole minority ALANA group. So I think that's important on top of a petition. That's even stronger when we come together. So let's continue to have this conversation and let's make it happen, because if we're talking about this, we have to actually take action and make it happen. So, if anyone wants to volunteer and create that coalition, I'm willing to support too. So let's think about that.
That coalition already exists. We call it the ALANA Brain Trust, and Brett is also involved with it. And we have a statewide network. So you're right. Let's
so we need to sign
convene at BRAC again and push forward with the momentum because we are a nonpartisan, multi-ethnic coalition statewide, focusing on policy issues. Brett, any closing word? You just heard John Yang, president of the Hmong Chamber of Commerce, great Asian business summit that you recently hosted, the chamber hosted in Metro State. Thanks for that energy. Brett?
Call your legislator, tell them this investment yields a lot more benefit and bang for buck, that communities of color, people of color, we are in all 87 counties, so it's not going to miss anybody, but we have to be realistic and also opportunistic. That what's the biggest bang for our buck, as relates to digital economy, high med tech, other places of that nature. It is within the unique area, and also people forget we're able to reach multiple countries across the globe because of our connections from there.
Thank you, Brett, and thank you for your work with Seeds to Harvest, getting all the young people engaged and motivated with the summer games that are coming up. Continue to keep us in the loop. We'll have you back here on America TV to talk about it. Um, and I know you've got a couple of other things on the hopper we'll talk about in the later. So Brett Buckner, 1mn.org. Thank you very much. Friends, AmericaTV.me is powered by you to spread the word that in this session, the beautiful part about politics is miracles always happen. And they only happen when the people connect the sources, the places of power. And you have to connect the people that you know, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, anybody who's voting, and tell them we need long-term investment. It has never been done in Minnesota. We have a budget surplus. We can do it now. $2 billion, put in a trust fund so that it will be spent on wealth building infrastructure. This is AmericaTV.me, powered by you. Thank you, and have a great Minnesota day.
Good night, guys. Thank you.
Good night.